Welcome back to the Child Division Lecture Series. We had a break in December because of holidays, and we're back and ready to roll. Today you're going to hear a very exciting discussion by Thomas Etts, who's an CSW and LCADC. Tom's been working here at Gritty for quite some time now.
Yeah.
He's at the Technical Assistance Center, where he does training on motivational interviewing, working with people with co-occurring disorders, and integrating mental health and substance use treatment. And he has many other areas of knowledge and expertise, so hopefully you'll get a little bit of a taste of those things today. Tom's been a CADC for more than 20 years, and for about the last 15 has been a social worker and treats people in a private practice in Middlesex County, and is my favorite person to refer people to, but he doesn't have any room, so don't try. And without further ado, I give you Tom Etts.
Thank you. Thank you for asking me to do this, Amanda. And
Pleasure. Thank you for saying yes.
I always got to put this little disclaimer out there because of my health condition. Last night I had dialysis, so I'm a little off. So it takes me a little while to get into the thing. So my processing speed may be a little slower. So please bear with me. Or I'm feeling a little nauseous, so I may have to bolt. So I hope that doesn't happen. But if you see me leaving, it's not because you said anything. I guess, have you guys been following any of these studies monitoring the future? This is University of Michigan, been doing this since the 1970s. So what they do, every year they survey 8th, 10th, and 12th graders to see what the current trends are with substance use and what most kids are apt to use and stuff like that. So they do these samples throughout the country every year. Even private schools they're doing now. Originally it was just public schools, so now they're even surveying public schools, private schools. So the good news is, when it gets down to tobacco, we're doing a pretty good job with those ads, those commercials, the truth ads and all that. It is going down. Even hooker, people were smoking hooker early on. I thought it was gonna pop. I had a lot of friends who wanted to go to the hookah bars and stuff like that. Even this is starting to decrease. So we're doing something really good with these commercials and getting the word out. It's tobacco smoke is not good for you, number one, and the kids are getting the message. That's the thing to see. When we're doing prevention, do we see a change? So obviously we're doing something well here. But when this thing is starting to pick up pretty well, vaping. Any of you guys talk to some of your kids? Are they vaping? A lot of them? What are they vaping? No, seriously, it's not a trick question. Do you ever ask them what they're vaping?
I do. I have some kids who are vaping juice.
Okay.
And some kids are vaping cannabis.
Cannabis, yeah. The hash oils and all that stuff are really, really easy for these kids to use in these vaping machines, and you wouldn't even know they're using it. You'd be standing next to it on the bus stop, seeing this big puff of smoke, and you might not know that the person right next to you is smoking weed or smoking hash oil or whatever, all right? And I think what's attracted to these young kids, has anybody looked at some of the devices? It's got an element of looking cool, right? If you think about that, they borrow all that stuff from the tobacco companies, right? They know what kids like, they know the thing. Like when I was a kid, smoking in the Marlboro Man looked like a pretty tough guy, right? I think 3 of them all died of cancer, okay? So that element of coolness with tobacco smoke, and now it's kind of moved into the advertisement of vaping. Now, as you can see here, as kids graduate, we get up to 27.8. Now, you can spend if you look at it from a young person's viewpoint, they can spend $1,500 a year on vaping equipment. Tobacco, $5,000 a year, right? So they get these folks here, it's cheaper, and they don't believe it's gonna hurt them. And now the data out there is a little bit skewed yet. I don't know if yes, there is a reduction, right, with all the other harmful carcinogens in cigarette smoke. So a lot of kids think vaping is a lot safer to do. And you know what? There's truth in that. There is some element of truth in it. So like when you're talking to young kids, when they start making those arguments with you, they're pretty well prepared. Because wait till I get to marijuana, and I'm sure you guys have talked to kids about marijuana. Some of them are like, I like to do the theses in marijuana smoke. All right. So when we talk about 12th graders now, smoking back in '97, we had a significant drop to 2017, right? I mean, that's a really good job we're doing, okay? But when we get down to marijuana, that actually is increasing. So if we think about with kids who smoke weed, 71% of them don't view regular marijuana use as a problem. So that kind of coincides with the numbers rising, right? But maybe the good news out of this, 65% of them disapprove of regular marijuana smoking. So it's kind of, the data is interesting, right? That they think there's nothing wrong with it, but at the same time, they don't approve of it, all right? Maybe that's the caveat we can get out of this. Yes?
Can I ask what they consider to be regular?
Yeah, you know what? When we talk regular, we're talking daily. But you know what? This is always the interesting problem we have studying marijuana. How often is often? How regular is regular? You know, some kids, will say, I'm a waking baker, right? That means they wake up and they start cooking right first thing in the morning. And how often do they do it throughout the day? This is why the studies on marijuana is very complicated. Like when I start going through it and I'm trying to get a good feel, is this drug that dangerous? Is it not? Right? And then I got kids coming in and telling me all about these cannabinoids, receptors all over the body. They've been doing their homework because we're just discovering more and more about the cannabinoid system throughout the brain and throughout the body. So I can't really figure how we do measure this. And then there's this, when people smoke weed, how do they smoke it? You know, everybody smokes it a little different. How long do they hold it in, right? And then there's what you buy in the street. Nobody's measuring it, right? Now, when I was a kid, if you got marijuana, it was like 3 to 7% THC in it, that was a lot. Today, just, ballpark starting is 15 to 17% THC in the marijuana. So it's a lot stronger, people are getting better at cultivating, and it's hard to make really good studies because of the bias of the drug itself, all right? And I'm just gonna let that be. The good news here too is with opiates, which I thought we would see an increase, but it's still decreasing. Among 10th graders, 12th graders, the numbers have gone down. But it doesn't seem to fit with this opiate epidemic. It's like, hey, wait a minute, we're losing a lot of kids in their 20s to opiates, to heroin overdoses. But a lot of that, I think, has to do with the influx of fentanyl. That's a lot of the drug is loaded with, okay? Now, out of the prescription drugs, it seems like the young kids are really jumping onto the Adderall train. And if anybody's teaching at the college here, will probably know that a lot of the kids, when it comes around midterms and finals, right, they're all sharing Adderall, who's got it, who doesn't have it. And I had one kid going, hey, I need that. I really do need it, and his buddy's like, oh, can I have some of your Adderall? And, stealing it from him. The only one that actually has gone up again is marijuana. Everything else has gone down. But I just want to spend a little time talking about the synthetic marijuanas, the Spice 2, the K2, and all that. All right, we don't know what's in there. All right, but they market it pretty good to these kids. And one of the things that kids like about it, that they could use it and it may not show up in the urine test. Okay, but the problem is with the Spice and the K2, it could do some really severe damage to kids. I have a few people in my practice who have told me that for like 10 minutes, they don't know what happened. But their friends were telling them they were just mumbling and chanting and doing some bizarre behaviors that kind of resembles almost like a psychotic episode. All right? There has been some cases where people wind up in the hospital with small brain bleeds. So what this supposedly synthetic marijuana is, it's just a bunch of herbs, and it's sprayed with some kind of chemicals that kind of replicate the THC molecule, but it's not, all right? And it is really dangerous. But it's easy to get, and I think a lot of the young kids don't think there's anything wrong with it, especially the way they market it. So just to sum this up, by the time the students are seniors, 70% of them will tried alcohol, half will have tried a illegal drug, 40% smoke a cigarette, 20% prescription drugs, first significant increase in 7 years in marijuana. Maybe, let's stop there for a minute. Why do you think marijuana use is so popular now? What's going on?
It's become illegal in some of our states.
Yeah, so the kids are, they're pretty hep to like, wait a minute, they're legalizing it all over. So therefore, the jump in logic is, if they're legalizing it,
Can't be that bad.
can't be that bad, right? What else? Think media. Think of movies, TV.
I know, like TV show, I mean, like Weeds and Disjointed and all these TV shows that are about people who are like using marijuana, selling it,
It's kind of normalizing it, right? And it almost makes it look like this is fun stuff, right? Even, what's his name, back in the day when I was a kid? Richmond High or something like that.
Fast Times at Richmond High.
That's it, right? I mean, that stuff was so funny, but we look at it as adults go, that's just funny stupidity, right? I'm not so sure young kids look at it the same way, right? It looks to them like, hey, that must be pretty cool. Hey, everybody knows Spagoli, or whatever his name was, that character, right? So our danger zone with drug use with adolescents is usually in this age group here, all right? The 14, the 16, the 17-year-olds, and the 18 to 20-year-olds, all right? Pretty frightening that it's starting here at 12 and 13. But when I worked in the prison, and I worked with a lot of youth that were in prison, it was, most of them by the age of 10 were dabbling with drugs. But part of the reason was it's all over. It's so much into the neighborhood that it's almost what we would consider the norm, all right? So what we're concerned about, though, when people start using it at early ages, the prognosis is worse, all right? It's easier to treat somebody who started in this age group than people who started in this age group. This age group, a lot of times what we know is a good majority of them will develop what we call a substance use disorder. Why is this group so vulnerable? Like what's going on in our society that this group here feels this need to change their perception? Because Dr. Volkow is actually calling drug use a developmental disorder. And Dr. Volkow is the leading psychiatrist at NIDA, who studies substance use in teens, and she's talking that being it so prevalent that it should be considered a developmental disorder. Your views?
Well, around this age, they're more socially oriented. Like, we know that their brains tends to be focused more around social relationships and things like that. And this is around the time when we have peer pressure and wanting to be cool and things like that.
Yeah.
So things are social situations.
Yeah, one of the biggest things we're concerned about, right, is this brain not developing, right? We know, as you can see, the blue means there's more development of the brain. As you can see in the early stages, it takes a while to get here, and we're always wanting this big, nice, thick frontal cortex full of dendrites to develop. And we're concerned that may not happen. And this is the brakes for when I'm using substance use, right? But if I can't access this region in my brain, or if I'm so caught up with the brain where it gets, with my reward system when it gets hijacked by the drug, right? Accessing that region of the brain can be very difficult. And actually when we see people on the PET scans, when they are craving, or even when they're in recovery, this part of their brain has a lot less brain activity. So therefore we're asking people to do something that they may not be able to do. And this is always a difficulty working with substance use, all right? So early use problems can interfere with meeting certain milestones. You guys have been working with adolescents. What milestones are we looking for to develop at this age? Some of the stuff that you want these kids to develop at the age of 13, 14,
Abstract thinking.
abstract thinking, right?
Self-esteem.
Self-esteem, okay. I want to find my niche, right? And there's a lot of anxiety when I don't know where I'm going, what I'm doing, right? And that's why I could be prey to what's going on around me, right? So we do know that there are some studies that people who use, again, regular marijuana, I don't know what that means, that there's a few IQ points that drop. Now, with those studies, if you look at them, those IQ drops don't seem to be that significant. So, you know, these kids are no dummies. They're looking at the research. And I'm asking you not to, if you make the argument that marijuana use is bad for them, you're just working on one side of their ambivalence, which is actually going to evoke the opposite side of their ambivalence, right? Especially in young people, all right? And again, these the spice and stuff, we really still don't know exactly how that's going to affect the developing brain. So before I get into this, why do they use? Guys,
So,
I always got to press
I
this.
can answer every question, but I don't.
Yeah, that's
It's not really right.
Thank you very much. The other thing is this. You guys are all adults. You went through this teenage stuff too. Maybe you might have some of the answers by just going back and like, hey, what it was like for me when I was a teenager. Or some of you may have used. All right. I'm not gonna lie. I did inhale. All right. So, you know, if you want to use your own personal experiences without telling me, I don't need to know that. But you probably have a good idea why young people may want to try using it.
It feels good.
It feels good, man. When you ask a young person, what do you like? Usually their first answer is, it feels good, right? Yeah.
Peer pressure?
Peer pressure? Right, if everybody else is doing it around me, who wants to be the guy that's not? Right? And if you think about stages of change, I see people that develop an addiction the same way they get out of it if you use stages of change. Most kids are in pre-contemplation until they get to a certain grade, usually like 7th, 8th grade, and all of a sudden there's a lot of people telling them, hey, did you ever try this, did you ever try that? And that's all of a sudden they start contemplating. Before that, it was all pre-contemplation. I'm never going to use drugs. I remember saying that as a kid too. Oh, no, I'm not going to do that. My mother and father told me that's really bad. And all of a sudden when I got to 7th and 8th grade, I had some friends who would be using it quite regularly and were always tempting me to do it. Another one. Another reason. Feels good.
self-medication.
Self-medication. Yeah, a lot of kids, right? If I feel anxious, uptight, if I don't feel like I fit in, and I smoke a joint, and all of a sudden I'm accepted by the people that I'm hanging with, and not only that, I get this. Ooh, yeah. It's a very rewarding thing, all right? So, to feel good, to feel better, to do better. There's an instrumental use of drug use, and these young kids are doing that. The Adderall, it's instrumental use. They want to do better on exams, and they want to be able to talk more, and things of that nature, right? Curiosity, other people, I think we talked about it, popular culture, right? And the big thing with weed now, it is a popular culture thing. Like even the movies, and there's a lot of messages like, this is okay. Now, anybody heard of the cognitive expectation theory of substance use? All right, it usually goes something like this. How many people in here drink coffee? Wow. How did you guys know, before you had your first cup of coffee, what it was supposed to do for you?
Social learning.
Social learning, you heard about it? Anybody else? Seen mom and dad do it? Woke up with the coffee smelling in it? I love how coffee, matter of fact, it makes me feel like, I hate the taste of it, but it is that powerful. So if we learn that with coffee, the same thing goes with drug use. So if we have a lot of messages out there that marijuana is harmless. It's a good drug. It's a good way to have fun. No wonder why the rates are going higher. And now our job is sometimes trying to have a conversation with a young person who's already using this drug. How defensive they're going to be when you approach it. So that's something we got to always pay attention to. Let me get out of this, because I think you guys did all this. Misinformation. Okay. One of the problems that I notice that people have that are in recovery, and I'm talking 40-year-old, 50-year-old people, they say to me a lot, Tom, I feel like I'm a teenager again. And I'm like, wow, I wonder if it's because you miss those critical stages and those important stages of learning how to cope with these types of emotions. Anger, envy, jealousy. Matter of fact, these things are written in the big book, AA's big book, and AA's 12 and 12 steps, right? And they talk about these emotions and how it's gotten in the way of people. But as a young kid myself, and especially maybe being a male, dealing with heartbreak was difficult. And not only that, you didn't have that social aspect of telling people, hey man, my girlfriend just broke up with me, and I'm really sad, I really don't even want to go to school today, and all that, because in the male sector, we're like, stop that stuff. Give me your man card. It's almost like we teach boys at a pretty early age to avoid these emotions. I don't think they can. But what can they do with them? They can suppress them to using drugs. Or it makes me fit in, or it makes me forget. Because even today, a lot of times in the movies, if you watch a lot of these movies, when somebody breaks up, usually the males go to the bar. Right? And usually their friends are like, hey, let's just get over this and stop all this whining and all this emotional stuff. I'm not ready for it, okay? So, I hate doing this part of the talk because this is actually looking at signs and symptoms of somebody who's pretty well caught up, all right? But these are some of the things that you might want to look out for. Needle marks, cigarette burns, nicotine stains, or the kids starting to shake, right? If they're coming in while they're under the influence, maybe their speech may be off, maybe it may be too rapid, which may be a sign of what? The kid comes in and all of a sudden he's presenting today and he's talking nonstop. Some kind of stimulant possibly, right? Unsteady gait, staggering off balance. Okay, anybody see somebody nodding off when they're using heroin? And then it's like they pull themselves right back, right? So usually that's a sign that somebody may be under the influence of some kind of narcotic. Usually with people, when I find with benzos, that they start to, they get annoyed very easy, right? They almost resemble somebody that's intoxicated. But I do notice if they're really high, that they get a lot of mucus built up in their mouths. So like as they're talking, you'll see a lot of stuff hanging out the corners, just stuff to be aware of, all right? The problem with this, most people by the time they're at this stage have gone pretty far, right? Hopefully our job with adolescents is to get them before they even wind up here, all right? So some of the things that we think that influence substance use is neighborhoods, community, school, friends, family violence. A lot of the kids that I work with in the prison, a lot of them, their family homes were so fragmented that there wasn't a really good source of a person to go to that would mentor or be an assistance. Matter of fact, a lot of these kids, right, they're looking for somebody to connect with, and there's a lot of pretty sharp guys in the neighborhood who would take these young kids, buy them sneakers, buy them food, buy them clothes, and get them to sell drugs for them, right? So a lot of times these young kids got into drug use for economic reasons, but then it turns into using a little bit, and now they're caught up in it themselves, all right? So we do know the genetic part. I don't think I need to go over that. Most people know. We know their personality traits like poor impulse control, or those kids that have that high need for excitement. Those are the ones that are showing you red flags that you might want to consider. Is this kid having a possible substance use problem, or the probability of developing a substance use problem? All right? And then we're always concerned with those kids who believe, you know, drugs are cool. There's an element of coolness that goes with it. And I can't even define cool. Does anybody know what we mean when we say cool? Because we say it all the time. Oh, that was really cool. What is cool? I don't know, but I want to be it. And I think these kids, we got to try to figure out what they mean by cool. All right? Exposure to stress, physical abuse, increase the likelihood of subsequent drug abuse, and starting drug use early. Anybody familiar with the ACE studies? Okay. When we do these ACE studies, and now they're back again, they're popular, I hope everybody's using an ACE. I mean, and then there's always with the ACE inventory, you could add more adverse childhood experiences because the tool is a little limited. It will say stuff as did you ever witness your father beating your mother or violence against your mother? It doesn't say anything about the opposite, right? Or there's questions that are left out about the community. Have you witnessed in your known community this and that and stuff? So you could add things in there that will tell you that there's more of a risk of this person having a trauma, all right? And the more you endorse, the higher the risk. So when we look at this, okay, this is my personal view about substance use. Most substance use, I believe, is rooted in trauma or highly stressful environments, okay? I think the problem is when we look at PTSD and trying to figure out what trauma is, that we get hung up by looking for a major event, right? Where's the big event that happened that caused the trauma? But with complex trauma, we're talking about repetitive coming home. Let me change this. If I live in a forest and I see a bear and I escape the bear, thank God. And now my mind is set, like when I hear anything in the distance that sounds like a bear, I'm prepared, I'm ready to get out of there, right? Very good way of adapting. If I come home though, I may be living with a bear. And I'm a child, I can't get out. And that is the problem with complex trauma. I have to put up with this. There's no place to go. I can't escape, right? And so there are some people that were in this study, the original studies, that actually said this is the driving engine behind addiction. I know we're really big on how the brain gets corrupted through the natural reward centers of the brain. You know, the drug get in there, it gets into the basal ganglia and all that, and it makes a lot of dopamine and it reinforces drug use, right? My only argument has always been against, like, why? You know, what would make somebody want to seek that out in the first place? Now, we know our natural, when we have sex and it feels really good, right? You release about 100 units of dopamine. If you use methamphetamine, you're going to release about 10,000 units of dopamine. That's why when you hear some people talking about those types of drugs, they'll say it's like an orgasm. And that's why they want to repeat it. So there is this balance between, is it an addiction of a disease of the brain being hijacked, or is it a disease based on the fact that the brain was already altered early in the child's life? Because we know trauma changes the brain, it changes the structure. And if I'm living in a house where I can't attach to my significant others, then the world is unsafe. And if you even think of Maslow, or if you think of Erickson, if there's no trust, if I have no sense of my own autonomy, because people beat me and people take away things and hurt me, I don't feel very good about my own self or my own prospect of even surviving. In fact, Sullivan, one of the early on psychoanalysts, said, when you mistreat children, and when children are in need of tenderness, and love and affection, and they're met with the opposite, aggression or neglect, they grow up in their own psyche, I'm living with the enemy. And that's usually the beginning of some kind of crazy personality disorders, antisocial, or borderline personality disorder. All right? So we know when you have this happening early on, it sets up the pyramid for early death. All right? So this is just something that you might want to look at when you're working with kids, because these are the ones that are going to be more at risk for developing a disorder. If you have an ACE score of 4 or 5, you see how the increases go up. Usually, this seems to be the cutoff point. When they endorse like 4 ACEs, right? There's usually increases the high risk of developing some kind of smoking or other unhealthy behavior. All right. Alcoholism, as again 4 or more, you see the jump. 16% become alcoholic in their adulthood. Now, I hate using the word alcoholic because it's such a vague term, all right? So I'm just going to say substance use or alcohol use disorder instead. Now, this one's pretty frightening. Those people that endorse 6 or more childhood experiences increases their chances of being an IV drug user by 4,600%. So those people that you see shooting up, they may be the byproduct of this. And I don't think a lot of times people have asked. So my thing is for you guys, if you're working with adolescents, as you start screening for trauma and early life stresses as soon as you possibly can, to identify those that, hey, this one's going to definitely need at least some kind of prevention or maybe some brief counseling. All right? It doesn't mean they're already down the path of what we would call full-blown addiction, but we want to get them before then. It's easier to get people before they jump in the river than to go down the river and pull them out of the lake when they're drowning. All right? So that's what all these screening measures and all of that is for. All right. Now, how many of you guys are familiar with De Clementi's and Norcross's stages of change? Not everybody? Okay. So, he's actually he's starting to be a friend of mine because I email him so much, he's getting annoyed with me. And I see him a lot at a couple of conferences. So I remember when he was talking to me, he said, Tom, he goes, I have no argument about all the other different etiologies, because my work has been focused on the process of developing an addictive disorder. All right? So which makes it a nice way of looking at this thing. Because I remember saying to him, well, what do you think about trauma? What do you think? He goes, yeah. And I was like, do you disagree with anything? He says, no, because my work has been focused on the process. All right? But a lot of people are always talking about the recovery process of it. But you develop it the same way. And I'm just going to use it quickly with my own cell phone. I hated cell phones. I didn't want nothing to do with them when they first came out, right? I thought I was pretty cool. Matter of fact, everybody's buying them, and I'm like, suckers. I'm not putting my money into that. I don't need that. But I was also a soccer coach. And one day, I'm playing soccer, and one of my kids got hurt really bad. And then we had to call 911. I had no phone. So, as I'm telling this story, identify where am I at when I'm first telling you, I don't need a cell phone. Pre-contemplation, right? Same thing goes with drug use. I have no desire, I'm not interested. But what happened? Something significant happened that day, and it moved me into, yeah, now I'm considering it. Why I'm asking you to do this when you're working with kids is to understand how they got in it in the first place, what they liked about it, who were they with, what was so important about that time in their life that they decided to move from pre-contemplation to contemplation and then into what we call preparation. Because after that happened, I started walking around and I was like, maybe I should buy a cell phone. And I started looking at the prices and stuff like that. Kids do that with drugs. They start looking around and they say, wait a minute, so-and-so I know is telling me he's using. Nothing bad's happened to him. He looks pretty good, actually. Right? And then I'm in action. So what defines action? Because this has always been the trick question. And are my kids experimenting or are they actually in action? So what would we call action? If you're familiar with stages of change coming out, what would we call action at that point?
6 months of behavior.
That's in maintenance, right? But we're talking really 4 weeks of sustained behavior, right? So like in recovery, we're looking like there's either some kind of reduction or abstinence for 4 weeks, right? We say, hey, that person's in action. You can apply that with kids. Are they still experimenting, or now they're in action? If they're doing it every weekend, what would you say? Yeah, they kind of passed the experimental stage, right?
It's routine.
And so this is what you have. This is what you're working with. Amanda said maintenance. So now you're working with these kids who've been doing it for years, or maybe even a year, or even 6 months. They're here. So if they're there, if you're talking about giving it up, where are they about giving it up? They're in pre-contemplation. Do you see how it matches? So if they're here, they gotta be here. As clinicians, where do we want them? We want to be here or there, right?
The other side.
So when they come in, we find out we're using it. It's like, listen, damn it, I want you to get here because I'm a good therapist.
They make me nervous.
You better get here. Okay. So here's some stuff you guys, and we know a lot of times the parents may be coming in first and asking you questions, okay? So here's some stuff you might want to look for. Change in relationships, covering up, preparations to reduce eye reddening and stuff. So you may find a lot of Visine and bottles in the car and stuff of that nature, right? Or start locking doors, starts going out every night. Usually when you're talking to the parents, you want to say, is this out of the norm? Or were they doing this early, right? So this is where we're looking for signs that maybe something's going on, all right? Making endless excuses. You know, if mom says, yeah, my kid's coming home, they're awfully hungry, right? Most of you all know what the munchies are. It's funny, none of you guys have been to smoking marijuana, but when I say munchie, y'all like, okay, so mood and personality shifts, emotional instability, they start to withdraw. So this, again, if your child was always that way, you want to find out, mom and dad, what's different, okay? Hygiene and appearance. Now, when kids start to go off to college, your child may come back with orange hair and purple hair, and it might be a little shocking. I wouldn't sweat that. What I would look for, though, if my child comes home and there's a weight change, a significant weight change, like 10 pounds, it's like, how did that happen? Okay, maybe a sign that they already stepped into using drugs and they're forgetting to take care of themselves. When people are using opiates, they don't have much of an appetite to eat, okay? When they're using cocaine and stimulants, they have no appetite to eat. If these kids are using Adderall and they're using a lot of it, the appetite will be suppressed, okay? So when your kid goes off to college and they come home and it's like, whoa, there's 10 pounds difference, what happened, okay? So these are some of the health issues. I don't want to get into that. I really want to get into, how much time I got, man?
It's 9:51.
9:51? Okay. So I really want to get into how to do some work and engaging people. But one of the things, again, when you want to get collateral information, what's been going on in school? Are there changes? Is there a loss of interest? A lot of kids, if they're into sports or something like that, will start to give it up. Usually that's a good signal that somebody's already in it. When they start giving up things that they used to do, to now, there's usually a signal that, hey, there's a big change going on, all right? Failure to do their responsibilities actually fits into one of the criteria for substance use disorder, right? When we talk about their inability to play their role. So as you know, a young person, their role is what?
Student.
Somebody said, yeah, to be a student, right? And to put their efforts into that. And also that to be a participant in home. If they can't do that stuff, usually there's a signal that there's something amiss here. And then, I'm not saying that right away this is substance use, but there's a good possibility it may be. And our job is to try to weed out and rule out what we can early on. All right? A lot of times when your kids are borrowing your car, and if they're up to smoking weed or doing something, they may leave little hints behind. I had a parent come in and said, I think my son is using marijuana. And I'm like, oh, what makes you think that? She said, my husband took the car to work and had his boss, he had to go pick him up, and he got in the front seat, and when he sat down, a joint came falling out of the seat. And his boss turned around and said to him, is there anything we need to talk about? You know, so it was a very uncomfortable moment. But you may find some seeds, you may find some little buds, rolling papers, roach clips. Today, a lot of kids are vaping marijuana. You know, so they may tell you, I'm only using that for smoking my favorite flavors, but we don't know yet, all right? And there's a lot of vaping boxes now that you can buy online, and these kids are using it and they're having like parties. Like, you remember the days in the bong? Those days are kind of like out, but vaping machines are in, all right? So those are some of the things you may want to look at for and find at home. Okay, the APA, the American Academy of Pediatrics, has suggested that every child should be screened for substance use. So, how many of you guys are screening for substance use? 100%, everybody? Fantastic, because that's what they're recommending. Even in your doctor's visits, and everybody should get some kind of screen. What kind of screens are you guys using then? Amanda?
It's usually a clinical interview.
Just a clinical view? Okay.
Yeah.
Are you guys over there
We
too?
recommend some tools, I'm happy to talk about.
Yeah, I got some tools I'm going to recommend for you. Actually, that may be, for young people, they may actually even like it even better because you can do them online. All right? So they can sit there in front of the computer and put the data in themselves. Okay? So, one of the biggest problems we have with addressing this problem is we look at it through this lens of addiction, right? And it's a very narrow view. So what screening does, it actually starts to get us out of this old model of defining addiction by a dependence, but it doesn't recognize the full continuum of substance use or the ins and outs, right? And how many people that you may have known as adults, they're in it for a while, they get out of it for a while, they get back in it for a while, right? This addiction across the lifespan is very intriguing, and also a lot of people are in it and out of it. So what we want to do with the young people is actually try to get them at those earlier stages, like I said. All right. So is anybody familiar with ESPERT? No. Okay. Screening, brief intervention, and referral to treatment. Okay. It's a very MI way of trying to screen people and be with people. It's a very quick intervention. And what I like about this, by defining the problem as excessive use, we can get out of all those words of addiction, alcoholic, and stuff like that, and people will respond better. It doesn't carry the stigma. All right? Plus, we can look at the excessive use of saying, okay, this is where they are now. They're drinking pretty close to those risky ranges. We could have a discussion about that. If you're already in the addiction part, then we're talking about treatment for the addiction. I may be able to get you here. We could have a nice conversation about what you like, what you don't like, where do you think this is going. All right? So if we look at the ESPERT model, it captures all of this. It captures this in abstinence. It gives us the ability to rule out right from the beginning and reinforce and affirm those kids that say, no, I don't use. I don't do any. Right? It's a very good time to say, wow, I am very impressed. Especially today when there's so much temptation to use. Because if you can continue to do this, you're going to grow up into a nice, healthy adult. Right? We need to affirm that. We need to spend those time with those kids. Right? And then we get those who are experimenting, asking them, what was it that led them to the experimentation in the first place? All right? So, If we use this, it's a public health approach, and this is the beauty of using an expert. Right from the beginning, we rule out non-problem users, like I just said, all right? It also identifies those who are at a level of risk, okay? And then we also talk about it, we can break it down for those who just need some brief advice. Not everybody needs big formal treatment. We don't need to expend tons of money on people who are not in the addiction part. And sometimes what we do, we'll find a young kid who's been using, and we'll send him off to a treatment facility where he's in a group of people who've been using for many, many years, and some of them using heroin and stuff like that. I actually sat in a group like that in my early years of becoming a CADC, and there was a kid in there who was 17 years old. And the group was going along like, you know, they were talking about what you were doing, this kid, and the kid turned around and goes, I don't think I belong in here. And I was so glad to hear him say that. He goes, I really don't identify with you guys. And guess what happened with the group leader and everybody else did? What they did to this kid was probably horrible. What do you think happened?
Denial.
Yeah, they pounced on him. And back in the day, it was denial. So they started yelling at him, you're in denial. And the kid goes, I don't know what you guys are talking about, denial. Right, and that's always been my Achilles heel when we talk about substance use. Because the way I was trained to get my CADC, it was either, you had two positions to be in. You were either accepting the diagnosis or you weren't. And if you weren't, you confirmed that you had it. It was like a no-no, it was no win for anybody. And the arguments and the stuff that I've seen, I thought the intentions were well-meaning. The methods were horrible. Because there was that tear them down, build them up attitude. You got to break through their defenses of denial, right? Usually all that does is create arguments and actually reinforces the substance use. This kid walked out of there, and guess what? He never came back. And I didn't blame him. I even talked to my supervisor. I was like, maybe this kid would have been better off with a different intervention versus putting him in a room with guys who've been using for 20 or 30 years. Identify patients who have the benefit from further assessment. So those are the ones that you say, hey, when you get done with the screen, you know what, you scored up in that high range. You may be more apt with this type of intervention. Are you willing to go? And I'll show you how to do this in a minute, all right? And also level of clinician interventions based on need and motivation. The way I was trained with substance use early on, it was like, so you've got a pretty serious problem here. What do you want to do about it? I don't want to do anything about it. Okay, well, go ahead. When you can come back when you're bleeding. And I think about that, like what we were telling people back then was, go out and get worse. Yeah, go out and get worse, because you don't believe you're in trouble yet. I don't have an intervention for you, so go out and get worse. And guess what? They did exactly that. But now when they came back, they have HIV, hepatitis C, and they're homeless. And it's like, is that worse enough? So I think we have to be careful how we talk to people, right? Especially when you're talking to kids and they're rolling their eyes and like, oh, you think you know it all, right? Actually, a nice intervention was being, when you see that, what would you say? When you're sitting with a young kid and he's going, oh, what would you say?
Something like, oh man, you've heard this all before.
Yeah, it's exactly right, right? It doesn't mean you're correct, but that's what a good, complex reflection is, right? Or this is really annoying and actually painful for you to hear, huh? You know, to see where it goes. And it actually, what it does is let the kid know that you're listening with them. And, you know, when we talk about joining, we're talking about following them. So wherever they go, we're with them, right? So one of the biggest things with young kids, they come in and they see us right away as the person that's going to take this away. Before we even know what this does for them, their level of motivation, right? We're already quick to say, well, you know, this is a bad thing to do, so you really should give it up. And then we think, well, let me do it this way. I really care about you. Really, I do. I'm a caring person. That's why I'm in this field. And I've seen this many times, and I know it might be hard for you to see this, but this is really bad. You really need to stop, right? Thinking that somehow, because most kids will be like, oh, because they're going to be very polite. Oh, really? Oh, thank you. Oh, you're so right. You're so right. Walk out the door and go like, whew, boy, I'm glad that's over. All right? So I'll help you kind of figure out a different way. All right. So the expert models offers primary prevention, right? It also talks to us about secondary prevention and interventions, all right? So this way we're being more sensitive towards labor, towards cost, right? Like I said, everybody that's got a positive screen doesn't necessarily mean they need to go to intensive treatment, all right? Tertiary treatment would be more of the acutely or chronically ill, all right?
So when you say secondary prevention, the kid is already in a state of abuse?
Yeah.
Okay.
They may be using, but not at risk, what we call risky levels.
All right, so why don't you talk about primary prevention for kids that are using?
All right, primary prevention would be trying to capture those kids that may be high risk of using.
But what about, I mean, there are a
Yeah.
lot of kids that will smoke once, not like it, go along, get with the peers, they start smoking. You know, there are child psychiatrists, several across the country, mainly on the East Coast, are using health promotion and prevention as a form of quasi-primary prevention, in some ways secondary prevention, where you're emphasizing healthy living.
Right.
And that's been demonstrated to be very effective in Vermont, and they're doing that at NYU as well. So I think we need to be thinking of broadening our concept of what we're doing.
Yeah, because when I with the primary prevention, yeah, you may get those kids who may be just experimenting here and there, right? But we're also looking at those kids that got those high risk factors that may not have developed or even started to use.
Yeah, I agree.
Right? Because we don't want, one of the biggest things that we don't want to put kids in down here when they're only up here, and actually put them in a group of people who are using and expose them to that at the same time.
I agree.
Right? So, but the secondary stuff is for those people who are definitely using, all right, who do have certain risks, but not what we call the risk of those folks down here, all right? And so what we do with some of these screens is actually, we can actually start to qualitative and quantify how much of a risk they are, all right? So we know that excessive use correlates with trauma. Now, one of the things with kids who use, who have a trauma history, when they start to use, they'll actually put them at a high risk of being traumatized again. It puts them in neighborhoods where there's a high risk of violence, maybe gangs with the whole bit, right? Exasperation of health conditions. One of the things I'm going to ask you to do when you're working with these young people is get them into it and get them a physical, because they may be actually using to compensate for some kind of health problem that's undiagnosed. All right? Exasperation of mental health conditions. Now, from working with co-occurring, people, some of these kids who already have a mental health disorder, we know they respond to substances differently than people who don't. Just a little bit of substance has a lot more negative consequences. All right? Case in point, a young kid that I was working with who had bipolar disorder, he'd go out and snort a few lines of cocaine and put him in a manic episode, which would last for like 3 or 4 days, where he usually wind up with a hospitalization. All right? Where some other kids would go out on a run, maybe a day or two, right? And then they're off sleeping it off, trying to recover. This kid was walking around, not using any more cocaine, and actually got arrested because he was looking typical. He's walking down a strip mall 1 o'clock in the morning, and he sees a phone store, right? Now, he's no longer high on cocaine, but now he's in the manic stage. And he sees the phones, and he's like, oh, I like those phones. I want one of those phones. So he breaks into the store. So he goes in and takes the phone he likes. This is the difference between him and somebody who's antisocial. He looks at the phone, he goes, oh, I like this phone. Then he starts going, oh, I like all these other phones too. So he goes and gets a bag, and he starts shopping. Now, most people who are doing criminal behavior, they know to get in and get out. He's in, and it's so amazing because he goes, Tom, when the cops came in and were pointing their guns at me, he goes, I was shocked. Like, what did I do? I'm just shopping. I like these phones, you know, and that's the extent of a manic episode, and that's why people get hurt. That's why we have to hospitalize them sometimes for that. So, what I'm asking you, if you're working with kids who do have a mental health problem, right? We know psychosis can be triggered by marijuana use. Matter of fact, I was running a group last night of men, and they were talking about the perceptual change of marijuana. You know, the time delay, the sense. One guy goes, "Yeah, when I'm high on weed, I can actually hear and taste words." And I'm like, "Yeah, that's the perceptual part of marijuana. It's why sometimes we could call it an hallucinogen. And today we don't know what to call it." All right? Unintended pregnancies, diseases, and more domestic violence. So has anybody heard of this tool? The CRAFT, all right? And the acronym stands for calm, relax, alone, forget, friends, and trouble. All right? So here we got 6 questions. The very first question is, have you ever driven in a car with somebody? Okay, right here we have just identified somebody that says, yeah, I drive in a car with people I don't use, but I've driven in a car with somebody that's high, right? So, going back to what you said, this person may get a prevention, early on prevention, to help them understand, like, you're putting yourself at risk already. And you know, what happened that you thought it was okay to get in a car with somebody who was under the influence, right? Now, it's maybe easy for us to say to our kids, I don't want you to get in a car with somebody who's high. Well, you send the kid off to a party, and his friends are driving him home. How much of them have the courage to say, no thanks, I'm calling an Uber? Even if especially if they're good friends with somebody, and the kid's like, come on man, don't treat me like that, man, I could drive. I could drive, you know, and so, you know, and a lot of kids think, and this is the scary part about weed, that you're high on weed, you could drive. You can't. And I'm gonna use a little personal story. I have a kidney disease, and my doctor gave me medical marijuana in a pill. So one day, I was really sick and nauseous, and I'm not eating. I said, you know what, I'm gonna take this thing. So I took it, but I had to go drop my car off at my friend's house, who was a mechanic. But I took it, and I said, well, I got plenty of time, he only lives 5 minutes away. I took it, I drove the car to his house, and all of a sudden, I'm sitting there talking to him, and I'm like, oh, man, what is happening to me? Something is not, oh. And he's like, you okay? I'm like, I gotta go now. So I got in my car, and I'm driving, and all of a sudden, I'm like, it kicked in. And I'm like, I'm sitting at a traffic light, and I'm like, oh my God, look how fast everybody's going out there. I can't do this. I can't do this. And all of a sudden, the paranoia and the panic started to kick in. And then as I'm driving, there was a little kid sitting in the car next to me, looked at me. And I was like, you know! Oh no, don't call the police! So, you know, I'm reason that story to let you know, it's not a drug that makes you feel relaxed when you're driving. Young kids don't think that, right? Matter of fact, one of the arguments was like, it helps me relax, it helps me stay calm. All right, so here is one of your screening tools. It's validated. It's a very good actual tool. Matter of fact, I got a little video I'm going to show you of a doctor using it. All right, but it's the way you deliver these screens that matters. So when you guys who are doing screens, what is the warm-up for it? Do you just bust it out, or you know, like, yeah, hey, so can I ask you some question about drugs you're using? Already, I think you might have lost the conversation. So how do you introduce it? How do you pull it out of your wallet and say, here, we're going down this road now?
I know that I usually just start to remind them that this is a safe place, this is a non-judgmental place, and ask them questions that might be sensitive or you might be uncomfortable with. I would appreciate as much honesty as you would feel comfortable with sharing.
Okay.
If you don't feel comfortable answering just yet, you don't have to.
Okay.
And kind of go from there.
No, very nice, very nice. Anybody else?
So, actually, a little bit opposite actually. I tend to not like that opening. If I do it at the very, very, very beginning of everything.
Okay.
Because I don't want to like stigmatize those questions. I don't want to be like, they covered all the normal, like, covered all the nice stuff. Now we're going for the serious.
Now we're going for the meat. The meat and the potatoes. Go ahead.
I mean, I know I did it for pediatrics for screenings, and so like I would always kind of preface at the very beginning of the visit.
Okay.
Like, hey, we're gonna cover, we may cover sensitive stuff at times.
Okay.
So just honestly, exactly, and then started asking about like, does the ankle hurt?
So what I like what you're saying is, if you can normalize this thing right from the beginning, it's not like you're being singled out, right? So it might be the introduction of like, hey, I got some really sensitive questions about how you relax, what do you do for recreation, and it has to do, with substance use. But I do this with everybody. This way it lowers that threshold again, like, oh, so you're not just singling me out again.
I was gonna say, along those lines too, I think I try to be more or less matter of fact.
Right.
And in a sense, kind of orient myself where I expect the answer to be yes.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not surprised, so people feel like, I'm open to whatever response you offer.
Right. Yeah, that's the other thing too. Be prepared for the yes.
I
Right.
set them up for the yes. A lot of times I just don't open up with the, have you ever smoked marijuana, right?
Yeah.
It's like, when was the last time you did?
Yeah.
Right, so that way kind of takes
Just
care
a
of
general-
that
yeah.
anxiety of like having to say yes. We assume yes, right?
Yeah.
So like, when was the last time, right?
Right.
Is it like, and you start off with like the higher level and then let them work down. So like, every day? No? Oh, okay. So like only 3 times a week? Okay, all right. So then that way it gives them an opportunity to answer lower.
Yeah, to bring it
So
down.
it's less anxiety provoking for them to
Yeah.
actually get to know a more honest.
I got some other friends who do, this like, hey man, we know it's pretty popular around the schools, so hey, what's going on in your school? What's
Yeah.
what kind of drug? What's the trends?
Right.
Because there may be weed for a while, but every once in a while wet shows up.
Yeah.
Every once in a while the shrooms show up. All those, somebody will come in with Special K or there'll be mollies floating around the school. So those trends do exist. So like if you open the door and if, with like what Amanda said, this nonchalant, matter of fact, if you're going down that road like I'm going to catch you, you're already setting up what I call the power dominance game. And it's so easy to do with adolescents because we are the authority figures. And they already come in like, oh, you're the authority, and I'm down here. What I want you to do is get down with their level. And, try to get away from that thing like, once you tell me, I have to tell you mother and father. Matter of fact, I think it might be a good thing to say, this is confidential. There's no reason for me to tell your mother and father about this. The only time that I may talk to your mother and father, if you're doing something I think that could hurt you or hurt somebody else, right? If you get that out of the way early on, when you introduce the screen, you may get a little more relaxed person. And I want to do this with y'all. A lot of kids have a hard time regulating themselves. So when they come and they see you, right, they're already anxious. You're already an authority figure. I want you to try to model how to relax without telling them how to relax. Like, okay, before they do that, let me just take a deep breath because this is sometimes anxiety provoking for me. So it helps me get calm. It helps me. And you know what? If you do it, you could watch this happen. They'll do it with you, right? And we know when we get people to start breathing, it starts to lower their reaction to past trauma, right? And the fact that you may be identified as that person who has power to make them do something that they don't want to do, it already sets up the power dominance game. A lot of times too, these kids go into treatment facilities and they're told, you will do this, you will do this, you will go to group at this time, there'll be no talking, there'll be no cross-talking, blah, blah, blah. Already you've lost your adolescence. So think even from a trauma-informed perspective. Think about allowing these people to make the rules themselves. Like, hey guys, before we get started, let's talk about this and that. And you can do the same thing with this. All right? Now, there are some screens that you can do, quick screens, that you can do online. This one here, right? And now you can do this the clinician, or you can let the adolescent do it, right? With your supervision, of course, right? And then there's, I don't like the word this, because people actually call it this, and you can see where that's going, right? So it's the BSTAD. Yeah, that's what I said. But the first time I seen it, I was like, as a matter of fact, somebody even said to me, did you ever try using the bastard? And I was like, excuse me? So I'll tell you which ones I like. I like this one because I think it's easier for kids to wrap their heads around with these questions. These questions are like, in the past year, how many times have you drank? If I asked you that as an adult, you'd be like, well, are you serious, man? So we want to make it something they can grasp to. This one shortens the time frame down, right? It doesn't have to send them into those like, oh God, in the whole year now? Okay. And then there is the DOS 20. Anybody familiar with this tool? Okay. It's an excellent tool, right? 20 questions. I know a lot of people say we don't have time. This thing shouldn't take you longer than 5 minutes. It's all yes or no questions. Every yes is an endorsement of a symptom or a possible problem. Let's put it that way. All right? There's 2 questions where no's are considered yes. All right? So get familiar with the tool, and you can give it with kids. Now, there's some research out there that says sometimes kids would rather do this on their own, and you'll get more honest information, or sometimes you could do it with them. Always remember, some of these kids may not know how to read and write. They're not going to tell you that. So as gently as you can, try to figure that out when you do hand them it and you want them to do it on their own. All right? What I love about it, it quantifies the use. So when I get somebody who scored 1 of 5 positives, right? And this is what we call ASAM criteria, level 1, it's just brief counseling. Right there in that session, we could talk about this. The risks, where they're going, right? The people that scored 0 too. We don't want to just like, oh, good job, see you later. Spend some time affirming that and let them know, hey, listen, if you have questions down the road, because sometimes maybe people are avoiding being honest, but you want to set this up that they'll come back. If they do discover, like, maybe I do have an issue here, then, oh, that guy Tom? Wow, you seem pretty cool. You seem like he's going to judge me. All right? Yeah. So then when you do the brief counseling, it's a lot about psychoeducation. And explaining to them the risk and the unintended consequences that maybe they're not aware of. All right? And then when we get into here, level 2s and level 3s, right? Maybe a little bit more intensive. And that's where you got to do some negotiation at the end of the screen. And don't worry, I'll get you there. And then there's severe, where we're like, you know, based on these scores, you're what we call really high risk. And usually kids will be like, what do you mean? And I'm like, do you know what high risk means? And they'll start giving you some stuff. And acknowledge what you hear to be true. If they miss some stuff, usually 10 minutes, usually I'll say to them, hey, that's pretty good. Do you mind if I share some other information that might be really helpful for you? Now, when I do it that way, I'm asking for permission. It's one of the biggest skills we use with MI. We're not pushing, we're asking first. If he were to say no, what do I do? If I say to a kid, hey, I got some other information that might be really helpful for you to know. Would you like me to share it with you? No, Tom, no thank you. What's the response? What do you mean, kid? I'll kill you now. I have my stuff all ramped up now. I don't know what to do. Yeah. So what you could do is like, okay, you know what? I'm so glad that you shared with me today, blah, blah, blah. I'm hoping that if further need, if you want to come back, you could. But I said, before you leave, can you give me some ideas or some possible reasons that why you might want to come back and see somebody like me in the future? This way it just opens the door of them talking about at least what may have to happen before they come back for further help. All right? As a matter of fact, I had a young man come in who was using a lot of opiates. And he came in, and his first thing when he sat down, he said to me, you know, I really don't want to be here. I'll tell you that right now, but my mother and father said you're some kind of expert. And I was like, oh, I think your mom and dad gave you some bad information. I'm not an expert. I said, really what I really like to get to know is, what do you like about the drug that you're using? And what's it doing for you? So we spent the whole hour talking. At the end of the session, he says to me, that was pretty interesting. And I was like, what was so interesting about it? He goes, I thought you were going to tell me all the bad things about this and that and why I should quit. He goes, you didn't do that once. He goes, don't get me wrong, I'm not coming back. He goes, but that was pretty cool. And I was like, oh, fantastic. I'm glad you thought this was pretty cool. I said, and you're not forced to come back. And that's what I hit him with. What would have to happen for you to want to come back? And I said, I always want you to know the door's open. He came back 6 months later. All right? And that's what I always talk about when you're doing a screen, to end it on good terms. All right? However, we're all good people. We don't want to see people get hurt. And so sometimes we may fall into that trap what we call the writing reflex. And it looks something like this.
It's just, there's all this pressure, you know? And sometimes it feels like it's right up on me and I can just feel it, like literally feel it in my head, and it's relentless. And I don't know if it's gonna stop. I mean, that's the thing that scares me the most, is that I don't know if it's ever gonna stop.
Yeah. Well, you do have a nail in your head.
It is not about the nail.
Are you sure? Because, I mean, I'll bet if we got that out of there...
Stop trying to fix it.
No, I'm not trying to fix it. I'm just pointing out that maybe the nail is causing...
You always do this. You always try to fix things when what I really need is for you to just listen.
No, see, I don't think that is what you need. I think what you need is to get the nail
See, you're
out.
not even listening now.
Okay, fine. I will listen. Fine.
It's just, sometimes it's like, there's this achy, I don't know what it is. And I'm not sleeping very well at all. And all my sweaters are snagged. I mean, all of them.
Yeah, that sounds really hard.
It is. Thank you. Ow!
Oh, come on. If you would just...
Don't!
Alright, so I think even though it's a pretty funny thing, right? There's a tendency when we see somebody that might get hurt or is, you could see their problem coming in the door. I mean, all the years I've been doing this, sometimes I walk out to the waiting room and I'm like, oh my goodness. You know, I remember there was a guy who came in, he's sitting in the waiting room, his nose is this big, all the blood vessels were busted on his nose, around his eyes, he's got a red face, and the waiting room smells of alcohol. And I'm like, I wonder if this guy came in for drinking. You know, I could have spotted that out and picked that right up and went with that right away, right? And like say, boy, you're showing some signs that you really might be in trouble here. If I would have done that, probably out quickly, right? So what we're doing, one beautiful thing about the screens, if you use them, it will provide you the focus of what you're going to talk about. And if you're using MI, the first thing is engaging. The second thing is the focus. And a lot of times when we start to do this work, we start to lose our focus. We go all over the place, right? Let the screen guide you to make this the focus of what you're going to talk about, okay? And then you can offer information on low risk. We can understand the client's point of view on their substance. We can actually explore a bunch of options, a menu of options of what we can do. You know, we can cut down, we can cut back, we can give it up completely, you know, or we can do harm reduction. I'm giving it to you, and I'll help you whichever one you want, right? We can apply support, and we can give advice when requested, and help them make some better decisions. In the handout I gave you, you can get this tool on SAMHSA's website, right? And it actually shows you how to do an interview, a brief intervention, all right? And it's usually based on what we call ORs, all right? But asking right from the beginning, asking for permission. Do you mind taking the time to do this, right? And then after it's over, do you mind if we talk about the results? A lot of times people do screens with kids, or we do assessments with people, and we never share with them. But you wouldn't tolerate that if you went to the hospital. If you imagine a doctor taking an x-ray and says, all right, you can go home now. But what does the x-ray say? Don't worry about it. It's our information. No, it's your information. So when people come in and we give them tests and assessments, we really should spend a little time of sharing what all that information means, right? So we provide feedback. You can give them the scores from any screening tool you use.
I'm a big fan of the audit and the DOS. Now with young kids, you know, the audit is a 10-question screen, but it gives you a score. It tells you low risk, high risk, moderate risk, that you can sit down there and talk to somebody. Hey, do you know what that means when we say you're a high risk drinker? That you're in a higher risk of falls, accidents, losing time from work, memory problems, depression. Sometimes people drink to the extent that you are, that they may develop desires to kill themselves. And usually I say, that doesn't mean that's going to happen to you. It's just that you're in that percentile of people. And then I sit back and wait, what do you think of that? Anything about what I just said alarming to you, right? And a lot of times when people come into crisis, usually when I do the screens and I get a score or something like that, it might, hey, this may be one of the reasons that you're here today. Maybe we could take a look at this. All right? So that's what we do when we provide the focus and the feedback, what the results of the screen said. All right? And then we talk here about enhancing motivation when we start asking questions. So what would you like to do about it? Have you ever thought about cutting back, quitting, and see where it goes? Because now we're moving from evoking to planning. Right? So by what they said is what we hope will get them to, maybe we could make a plan. Right? And then we can discuss what those next steps would be. So if you were to cut down, how would you do that? I know right now you're not even considering cutting down, but if you were, who would you use to help you? Right? And well, like I said, what would have to happen for you to consider that maybe I should cut down? Okay? And always end it on good terms. A lot of people get insulted when people don't listen to our advice. And listen, I like for people to like me, I like for people to come in and stay with me, but you know, people do leave. Sometimes we're not a good fit. All right, if you go to that website, this is the young man you're going to see, and let me get you started here with that.
And this is free, right?
Yeah, this is all free, all right? But it's a nice way in your own office to practice your own MI skills without feeling embarrassed of doing it in front of anybody else, right? So, the first question is they give you a list of choices of questions to start the conversation, all right? The first one I think I would choose. I want to let you know that I'm not here to tell you what to do, how to live your life, all right? You're the only one who can make those decisions. I just wanted to hear what you think and how you feel about marijuana. So this kid scored on his screen that he uses marijuana, all right? So watch what happens when you click this one.
I want to let you know that I'm not here to tell you what to do or how to live
You
your
see
life.
the woman on the right?
You're the only
She's
one
gotta
who can
guide
make
you.
those decisions. I just want to hear what you think and how you feel about marijuana.
So listen to what he has to say.
Oh, okay, yeah, cool. I don't know, I mean, I like that's something I can do with my friends. It's fun.
Okay, before I go to the next one, what were some questions that you guys might want to come back with? Think open-ended though. Or you might want to come back with a reflection.
What's fun about it?
Ah, okay. So let's see what we have here. Who do you smoke with? You like spending time with your friends? How often do you smoke with them? So it's just something you do that's fun. What are some other things you and your friends do for fun? It's part of how to socialize with your friend. What, if anything, do you like about using marijuana? Which one you want to pick? 3? Let's see.
It's part of how you socialize with your friends. What, if anything, don't you like about using marijuana?
I'm not worried. I mean, I know some people have problems with it. Be careful. I know my limits.
Okay, now, how many of you guys may have a reaction to a young kid saying, I know my limits? Right? Because it's like, wait a minute, you're 16 years old and you know your limits? That's however, if we step over that line, you may shut this conversation down real quick, right?
Oh, you must know yourself really well. For such a young person.
Yeah.
No, I wouldn't say the last part.
Very good, man. All right. Okay, well, if you feel safe, the way you're using now, that's a good thing. The careful thing is not to smoke at all. It's great that you're thinking about how to balance using with your limits you set for yourself. What would it look like if you got close to that limit? 3?
It's great that you're thinking about how to balance using with the limits you've set for yourself.
So that woman over on
What would
the
it
right,
look like if you got close to
when
that
she
limit?
gives you this, you hit it. You hit it well.
You know, like mess with your head a little, make you sort of like, I don't know, just make it hard to remember stuff.
Stephanie was looking at me the other day, she goes, he looks like he's gonna cry.
He's not gonna cry.
Can you do one that has the wrong?
Yeah. Okay, let's go with this one.
I understand that you have to say that. And it's not that I don't believe it, it's just, I really think I'm okay.
How come you didn't repeat it though? I'm sorry. You should have repeated the question. All right, I'll finish this by saying, if you continue to do this thing throughout, it will score you on all the 4 categories that we use for the MIDI when we're trying to test somebody's skills in MI, right? So we'll talk about open-ended questions. It will give you a score. It will give you a score on your reflections. It will give you a score on the, was it a collaborative approach or was it an authoritarian approach? And it gives you some really hard data to let you know, like, all right, these are the areas I need to improve on, right? So if you guys are practicing MI, don't get discouraged when it doesn't go well. Matter of fact, it's probably the best learning you're going to get when it doesn't go well, right? Because you'll know then, I'm out of tune. It's like playing an instrument. Like when you're doing it, you can feel the energy. It feels like, oh yeah, we're moving in a direction, right? And then all of a sudden when you're out, it's like, oh man, somebody's out of tune, out of key. And guess what? It's me, right? It used to be easy to blame it on them. So one of the models I was trained on, right, when I went for my expert training, was this one right here. And it's called, there's a different amount of different expert ways of working. This one here is very similar to that handout I gave you. The first thing you want to do is build rapport, ask permission, right? Can we talk about this? This is sensitive stuff, right? Then secondly, you want to find out what they like about it. A lot of people don't want to do this. It doesn't mean you're endorsing it. When somebody says, yeah, Tom, I shoot heroin because it makes me feel really good. It makes me feel safe. It makes me feel like I don't got a problem in the world. Reflecting it back doesn't mean you're agreeing with it. It's just letting that person know, I hear what you're saying. And there was a woman I worked with in a methadone clinic. And she had HIV, AIDS, hepatitis C. And she was seeing the infectious disease doctor. And the doctor was really laying it down on her about, you know, if you continue to use heroin, you're going to kill yourself. What's wrong with you? Blah, blah, blah. You got to stop it. So lucky me happened to be walking down the hall when she got done with that intervention. And I walked right up to her and she said, I said, hey, caller, how are you? And she said, F you, blah, 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 blah. You're all stupid. You don't know what you're talking about. I hope you die in hell. And I was like, ooh, you want to talk about it? So we went in a room and we started talking about it. And she said to me, she goes, you guys think you're geniuses. You've gone to school and you learn all this stuff and you come in here and tell us what not to do. She goes, you guys don't think I don't know that my heroin use is killing me? Are you guys stupid? And I said, you know, we must sound that stupid. We must sound annoying. And she goes, you're damn skippy. So she goes, do you have any idea what heroin does for me? And I said, tell me. And she was like, Tom, when I was being abused as a kid and neglected by my mother and father, the first time I shot up, it was like, oh. And that's exactly what she said. And then she said, I felt this big warmth throughout my stomach. And she goes, I finally felt like I had a security blanket wrapped around me. Now that's pretty symbolic stuff, right? That everything is okay. And she goes, and that's what you want me to give up? And I said, my God, do we really miss it? So those couple of years I worked with her, we worked with, I didn't even address her use. I addressed on helping her find safe, trusting relationships. And the first one was me. The second one was one of the guys that used to drive her to the methadone clinic. So this guy that used to drive her, he used to drive her every day. And he wasn't there going in for his own methadone. He drove her every day. He lived in the apartment house. And I said to her, I said, can you tell me a little bit about this guy? I said, I see him here all the time. She says, yeah, you know what he wants, Tom. You see how her mind is set up already? See what abuse does? Okay. I said, no, tell me. You guys are all the same. That's all you want. He goes, oh, words. He wants me to give up the cookie. And she goes, I'm not giving it up. And I'm like, that's your choice. I said, how long has he been hanging around with you for 5 years? And she said 5 years. And I said, wow, that's a pretty long time. And there hasn't been no sexual contact or nothing. And so I had to use a little humor. I said, can I say a little something about my species? I said, if we're hanging around you for 5 years and you ain't giving up the cookie, maybe he may like you. He may really just care about you. What does that mean to you now, knowing that he just may like you? So it opened the door, like maybe some men just don't want to have sex. Maybe some men are not just going to take me, use me, and toss me away, right? Caller today is running groups in the methadone clinic for people who are on methadone, because in Brooklyn, a lot of the NA meetings, they won't let them speak if they find out they're on methadone, right? So the moral of that story is, if you don't help understand what that relationship is to that substance, then we're missing, okay? And then these young kids that didn't really have poor attachment to key figures in their life, guess what they'll attach to? The drug, just like Colin. There was no other object to attach to. The drug was the object now. So taken that way. And the worst part was, she wasn't even getting high anymore, but the belief that one day she's going to get high again and feel that good again was one of the reasons she kept on using, right? So what I'm asking you to do when you're working with these young kids is really find out, what do they like about it? And not coming at it from an attitude like, wait until I get to the point where I can talk you out of this kid. And they'll respond better. It will help get away from that dominant role that we play. We'll get down to their level. You know, everybody says, I want to meet them where they're at. It's important to know where they're at. The screens will alert you to that.